All right, let's dive right in to a question that I bet a lot of you out there are thinking about. Is it actually better to start your lecturing career in Indonesia
Mhm.
with a master's or hold off until you've got that PhD?
Mm.
It's a pretty major decision, right? And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're going to give you the knowledge you need to really strategize and decide which path will give you the best shot at becoming a professor in Indonesia.
And it's more than just about the degrees themselves. It's about having a plan. You really have to understand how the higher education system in Indonesia works all the ins and outs.
Exactly. And on that note, maybe you can give us like a quick overview of what the career path actually looks like for a lecturer in Indonesia. Like, what are the key steps you got to take to reach that professor level?
Well, the big thing is come points. Think of them kind of like academic currency that every lecturer in Indonesia is trying to earn. You get them for all sorts of things, teaching, researching, publishing, even community service.
Okay, so come points are like what you need to move up the ladder.
Got it. But how do these points actually connect to the ranking system itself? So the goal is to climb up the functional ranking ladder. You start as a lecturer candidate and work your way all the way up to full professor. Each rank needs a certain number of come points to qualify. Like to become an associate professor, you need 700 come points. And to reach that ultimate full professor status, you're going to need a whopping 1,050 points.
Wow, 1,050. That's going to take some serious dedication.
Yeah.
So let's say you're just starting out. Where do you even begin with collecting these come points? Does it matter if you come in with a master's or a PhD?
Yeah, your starting degree actually determines where you begin on that ladder and how many come points you kick things off with. If you have a master's, you typically enter as an assistant expert with 150 come points. But if you've already got a PhD, you come in as an assistant with 200 points.
So right away that PhD gives you a 50-point head start. But wouldn't starting with a master's maybe give you a chance to get some real-world teaching experience,
Yeah.
before you dive into a PhD program?
You're right, practical experience is super valuable. But looking at our sources, it seems like there's a bit of a catch-22 when it comes to PhDs in Indonesia.
Oh, really? What's that?
Basically, the longer you wait to get your PhD, the harder it becomes to actually have the opportunity to do it. There's almost this unspoken pressure to finish it early on in your career.
That's interesting. It sounds like there's more going on behind the scenes than you might realize at first. But why would universities discourage lecturers from getting their PhDs later on? Wouldn't having more highly qualified instructors be a good thing for everyone?
You'd think so, right? But our sources suggest that sometimes things like academic politics and personal connections, they can actually end up being more important than simply having the qualifications when it comes to PhD opportunities. It's kind of like an exclusive club almost.
Yeah.
And this can be a real barrier for lecturers who maybe they're a bit further along in their careers, like in
Mhm.
their late 30s or 40s, and then decide to go for a PhD.
Yeah.
Their chances of getting the support they need, like funding or flexible schedule, even just getting approval from their bosses, it gets tougher as time goes on.
It makes you think that maybe the system is kind of accidentally favoring people who can just go straight from their master's into a PhD. People who maybe have more financial security or less family responsibilities?
It definitely raises questions about how fair and accessible academia really is. And this ties into another important issue that our sources bring up the financial risks of doing a PhD while you're also working as a lecturer.
Ah, yes, the financial side of things.
Yeah.
That's always a big consideration. What kind of financial challenges might a lecturer run into if they decide to go for their PhD while they're still teaching?
Well, unless you're in a high administrative role like a dean or a rector, taking time off for a PhD could actually mean losing those administrative duties. And that means losing the extra income that comes with them.
And that's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're already trying to manage a household budget or support a family.
Exactly. Imagine going from a comfortable combined salary down to just your basic lecturer pay. And at the same time, you've got all these PhD expenses piling up tuition fees, research costs, conference travel.
So for those lecturers who can't afford to take that kind of financial hit, pursuing a PhD right after their master's might not be the best option.
And that's where being strategic really comes in. If you're in that situation, getting a PhD scholarship could be a total game changer. Having a fully funded program takes so much pressure off. You can actually focus on your studies. You don't have to be constantly worried about how to pay the bills.
So instead of juggling a full teaching schedule and research and family responsibilities on top of the financial strain of a PhD program, a scholarship lets you put your academic goals first. That makes so much sense.
Exactly. It's all about setting yourself up for success, not just academically, but financially and personally too.
So it sounds like there's no easy answer to the question of whether to go for the PhD right away or start with a master's. But one thing's for sure, you got to have a plan.
Absolutely. There's way more to this decision than just which degree comes first. You've got to think about your financial situation, your career goals, the academic culture you're stepping into, even your personal commitments outside of work.
It's a balancing act for sure. Weighing your love for academia with the practical stuff of life. And speaking of practical stuff, our sources actually dive into a really interesting case study. It brings all these different factors to life.
Yeah, this story really shows how important it is to think strategically within the Indonesian academic system. Remember those come points we talked about? Well, this lecturer had actually managed to rack up an incredible 1,000 come points.
1,000. That's way more than enough to qualify for full professor, right?
It is, but there were a couple of unexpected roadblocks. First off, jumping straight from their starting rank to full professor, a 5-level jump was seen as too much too fast by the system.
Wait, so even though they had enough points, the system wouldn't let them move up that quickly?
Exactly. And on top of that, there's also a minimum time requirement between when you start your academic rank and when you can apply for professorship, which this lecturer hadn't met yet.
Wow, it's like there are all these hidden rules and guidelines that you need to know.
You got it. This case study just goes to show how important it is to understand these unspoken dynamics and really plan out your career path.
So what did this lecturer do? They had all these come points, but the system was holding them back. What was their strategy to get around this?
The best move in this situation was to apply for associate professor at the 700 cum point level. It wasn't the final goal, but it was a key step on the way to professorship.
So a clever sidestep to work around the quirks of the system and still reach their ultimate goal.
Exactly. It's the perfect example of how timing strategy and knowing the unwritten rules can be just as important as racking up those come points. It's a good lesson for anyone who wants to make it to the top in Indonesian academia.
I feel like we've learned so much in this deep dive about just how complicated it can be to start a lecturing career in Indonesia. It's not just as simple as getting the degrees and racking up the cum points, right? It's like there's this whole other layer of navigating the system and all its rules, both the written ones and the unspoken ones.
It really is about being smart and understanding all the nuances, and of course, planning everything out carefully. And I think most importantly, realizing that there isn't one perfect path for everyone. The best way to go depends completely on your own situation and what you're hoping to achieve.
So true. So we've looked at the pros and cons of starting with a master's versus jumping right into a PhD. We've uncovered some of those hidden obstacles in the system and even talked about the financial side of things, like how much does it actually cost to do a PhD while you're also working.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, and hopefully you're out there listening and feeling like you've got a better grasp of your options now. You can weigh those options and make the choice that really fits with your dreams and your reality.
Exactly. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with one last thought to think about. Imagine yourself at the very beginning of your academic journey in Indonesia. Knowing everything we've talked about today, what would your first step be? Would you go all in on a PhD program right away, or would you start with a master's and get some experience under your belt first?
That's a great question. And there's no right or wrong answer, of course. It all boils down to what your specific situation is like financially, how much risk you're comfortable with, and of course, your ambition. Is it more important to you to get those extra cum points early on, even if it might be a financial struggle? Or would you rather focus on getting some practical teaching experience and building connections before you dive into a PhD program?
It's definitely a decision that needs some serious thought. Weigh those pros and cons, look into all your options, talk to some lecturers who have been there and done that, and most importantly, trust your instincts.
The world of academia needs passionate people like you. So no matter which path you choose, we know you're going to do amazing things for higher education in Indonesia.
We can't wait to see what you accomplish. Keep learning, keep growing, and never give up on those academic dreams.